Hello and welcome to Two Wizards and a Mic. This is a show where a couple of old farts basically talk about D&D and encourage you to play and how to play better and how to play gooder. Uh, gooder. My name is Shane,
And I'm Andrew.
and this show, I want to remind you, is of course brought to you by Cawood Publishing at worldofmere.com. That's Mere with two R's. So, how's it going?
Pretty good, pretty good. Yeah, spring is here. Now I'm getting the natural light instead of artificial light for this podcast.
Nice,
Yeah,
nice.
the
I, of
bald eagle
course,
just flew
dwell
by
in a
the window.
cave.
Sorry,
I
you're in
dwell
the,
in a cave.
right. You're
So,
down. Yeah, you're in the urban cave. I'm out here in the wilds of the suburb.
the
Some people
suburb
are like,
where,
"Oh, that's not really the suburbs." Oh, actually, it really is. It really is.
well, you could trip out of your front door and almost land in the ocean. I mean, you're not that far away from it, so.
Oh yeah, and the wilderness. Like if you walked, you only have to walk about half an hour behind me, even 20 minutes behind me, and there's
And
nothing
you're,
there.
oh, wow.
There's nothing. You're not going to hit anything, until you hit the Arctic Circle. There's it's just wilderness. Yeah.
Well, is there any update on your Kickstarter?
Yeah, actually behind me you can just see there's a pile of books
Couple
and
of boxes
packages
and
there.
nice.
So 70 about we're almost at 70% of the shipments are on their way. I know there's a
Nice.
number of books that have arrived even in on the East Coast of North America,
Cool.
and actually even some have arrived in the UK. A lot are in the mail. Like I'd say maybe half of all of the shipments are in the mail right now, about to arrive. Overseas packages and some of the larger ones, those are going to take a bit longer. And then it looks like the next Kickstarter, the art is almost finished. So it's likely we'll probably launch that mid-April, but we'll keep people updated. Yeah, the art's almost done. Then layout for because we have a promotion booklet we always include in the Kickstarter now. So all of that
Nice.
should be ready by the end of the month, I hope, which means we can send it into Kickstarter, which means we can probably launch mid-April. I'm hoping that would be the best at this point.
Nice, nice.
Yes. And then today, I know our title of this episode is Building a Backstory. I was like, what song is so familiar? What song is so similar? Building a Mystery, Sarah McLachlan,
That would
right?
be such a calm backstory building song that you could
Yeah.
play. Just, that would actually, you know what? That is now the official song for backstories in
Backstory
D&D.
building. Yeah,
If you are building a character, play it.
you definitely wouldn't have the most uplifting character if you did that. But we are going to talk more positive, about more
Of
positive
course.
vibes than that. So building a backstory, so not your background of your character, which now in fifth edition is part of the mechanics really of the game. So that's what
Yeah.
something separate. The backstory, which can be, that can be wove into your backstory, your background. So
Right.
today we're going to talk a bit about making one. So you don't actually have to do it. Um, and there are a lot of jokes about people who write 3, 4, or 5 page backstories and hand them into their dungeon master. um, you don't have to make one of these, but it is pretty fun to have one. And the more detailed you have, the more detailed backstory you have, the more fun it is for the DM to then integrate that back into the story. And yeah, so there's no real rules about how you do this. There, you can do it however you want. And the basics about that backstories obviously are your name. Um, there are great lists in Xanathars for names if you're looking for them. There's many online generators. Most of them are terrible, but you could try to find one that's good. The Xanathar's book, as we mentioned many times, is really useful. And in the back, it has actually lists of names. And they're from all different types of
No.
cultures. And they're for all different types of races. So there's a lot of variety. Then, obviously, your class and your race are part of your backstory. And as we mentioned, your background. And those are all in the player's handbook or in the basic rules, which you can get for free on the game's main site, the D&D website.
Right.
Now, there are also traits, ideals, bonds, and flaws, which are part of making a character in the mechanics. Those can definitely be a big part of your backstory. So on page 124 of the player's handbook, they talk about ideals, bonds, and flaws. So ideals are your beliefs, really. And some examples for ideals that are in the backgrounds. Here's one for charity. If charity was your character's ideal, I always try to help those in need, no matter what the personal cost. So that would be an interesting character. That would be like many of my monk-like characters that I end up playing. Another ideal would be independence. I'm a free spirit. Nobody tells me what to do. Yeah, that would be about the other half of my characters. Then another ideal tradition, the stories, legends, and songs of the past should never be forgotten, for they teach us who we are. So there's another example for ideal. And you can make your own up as well. Then for bonds, these are the things that are your connections to the world. So an example of a bond, one would be that all the gold that you make goes to your family. We had one character in our group recently, all their gold went to their temple, I think. And another one who they had to give away all their gold. They didn't believe in having any wealth. So that was interesting. They had to find ways to get rid of all their gold. Yeah. And another bond, a good example, everything I do is to protect my temple. Flaws are pretty obvious, things that you can work on. And these can be very fun as well to have. So I'm too greedy for my own good is one example. I can't resist a pretty face is another one. And another flaw, if there's a plan, I'll forget it. If I don't forget it, I'll ignore it. And that's about half the players in D&D have that one. And maybe their characters too.
I would never do such a thing. I mean, not at all.
No?
I would never. No. Are you kidding? I'm pure as the driven snow. I would never have anything in my backstory to, all like,
All right. So another aspect is the personal traits. Now, these are also listed in the background section of the player's handbook, some examples. And these, again, can be humorous and add depth to your character as well. So personal trait, I've enjoyed the fine food and drink and high society living, and rough living now grates on me. That's a good one, because being an adventurer, you're just going to have to learn to deal with that.
Exactly.
Another personality trait, always optimistic, or the opposite would be always pessimistic. Although that would get on my nerves after a while. I'm not a fan of the C-3PO character, for example. People whine and complain about Jar Jar Binks. I would get rid of C-3PO before him in a second.
Well, he definitely is an individual who requires some,
High
how
maintenance.
shall I say, high. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Another personality trait, flattery is my preferred trick for getting what I want. So that would be a really good one, actually. We haven't had too many players who've had characters like that.
No, I don't think so at
Another
all.
personality trait, sarcasm and insults are my weapons of choice. Another one, I'm a hopeless romantic. I'm always searching for that special someone. So that could add a lot of depth to the game. Um, we did have a character like that who was a sort of a womanizer as well, played by a woman, by the way, a male character. And that character got into a lot of trouble because he ended up getting involved in these with these in these in relationships that had a lot of drama. In fact, in that Greyhawk campaign, I decided to make this character like the femme fatale from the Affair show, who is
Oh.
just like her. Talk about a like life full of drama. And so he got wrapped up with her, and that was, yeah, that almost cost that character his life at a certain point. Yeah. Yeah, so I think personality traits, that's one I really like quirks. There's also a list for NPCs in the Dungeon Master's Handbook. So you could add those as well, like, like a limp as well, some physical traits as well. So I think a lot of those are really interesting. Have a character has a really deep voice, a really high voice. Um, there's a lot there you can play with. And then overall, as far as the basics are wanting to know the motivations of your character, like what motivates you from your backstory, from your history.
Yeah,
So I
that
think,
is probably the most important component.
yeah, I think after that sort of like summarizes who you are, what is, there's your background, there's your history, who you are now, what is motivating you, what motivates you, what do you care about? So I think that
Yeah.
all of those are really important to have as a basic part of your background, of your backstory.
It is like one of those kinds of things where uh I'm trying to think of a different word other than flavor to the game or
Mhm.
richness to it.
Depth.
But you
Yeah.
have all of these options that eventually, one would hope would tie into the story or would somehow affect the story, where, you can have a, like the one of the examples that I've always brought up is how parental units or parental units where parents can be brought into the story,
Yeah.
siblings can be brought into the story, that really can shift the way the game is, what direction the game is going in, because suddenly you have either a player that wants to protect their parents or maybe not, or maybe their parents are some sort of overburdening kind of, that'll drive the action in some way.
Mhm.
So yeah, that kind of stuff is great. I just love it.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'd want to know about the player character's family if possible. And I remember when I used your parents with your tiefling character in the city, and they
Yeah.
were very wealthy and they had some influence. So that adds another level as well. So maybe they could help your character, but maybe sometimes they're not going to be a help. Maybe they're actually going to be a hindrance, right?
Well, especially since you could say that the character is feeble for whatever reason. Like, say they're
Mhm.
really really old,
Yeah,
and then your character might actually choose to protect the parent or help out the parent or the sibling,
yeah,
uh, and not abandon, but basically, the party might be,
yeah,
you got to do this, and it's like, what? No, my mom, or my
yeah.
dad, or whatever.
Oh
And
yeah,
so that can totally mess up, especially if you get into an encounter that's a bit ugly. Like,
yeah.
yeah.
Oh yeah. And I can tell we have a player right now who has a half elf character, your really high level party, the one in Greyhawk, and we've rescued their brother from the Underdark. And I can tell that that player would do anything to protect the brother of their character, anything like. And so they might have to actually at this point because now the brother's disappeared.
Yeah.
All right, so some extras you could add, but I don't think these are as vital. The hometown. So, are you from a village, a town, a city? Did you grow up in the wilderness? Did you grow up in another kingdom? That would add another level of interest. Did you come from another continent or another world? That would be like maybe your character's from Feyland. or the underworld. Who do you worship? Your deity. So in my campaigns, that's definitely part of the story I'd like to build on. I'd actually like to build on it even more. And so that would be something that could be really interesting. Your history, your detailed history, those are the people who do write, 3, 4, 5 pages. And I find that interesting, and I can add that to the story. And then, like, as we talked about your family and friends, how close are you? How big is this family? How wealthy are they and influential? And where are they? And then I didn't add
Yeah.
this right away, but your enemies. Do you have enemies before the campaign even starts?
Do you
So
have
we can have
enemies? Do you have like the ability to? I actually, there's I've forgotten what it is, but essentially you could find if you're like a member of an organization, like not just like a religion, but
yeah.
maybe you're a member of a gang,
Mhm.
and you wanted to get out of the gang, or maybe you just decided you're going off for an adventure for whatever reason, but the gang might not like it, or they might come looking, or yeah, those kinds of things. I think are
Yeah,
really
that's a
cool.
very good point. I think factions and enemies are those. How are you connected to those?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and we have again a player, the player who usually does give me, a 3-page backstory. Um, they did have one character recently who grew up with this another girl, and when they were growing up, basically she took the light path and her friend took the dark path, and they'd been
Uh,
sworn enemies ever since. So right away, like, I have a built-in NPC in the campaign. So yeah, it's great. Now there are many lists you can find. I guess I can add some down in the comments. There's lists online you can find for D&D characters, or just for characters in general in literary works, etc. There are great lists of questions you can ask which help build your character.
yeah.
So we're going to go through some of those. So a good one would be who raised you,
You
right?
always have to have a parent, generally, or a guardian of some sort.
Yeah.
Uh, how did they raise you? Were they a good, upbringing? What kind of stresses came with that? I mean, it sounds like life that people have these kinds of encounters.
Yeah, exactly. And was it a grandparent? Was it a faction like you just mentioned? Can be a fun part of a backstory. Was it the temple who took you in? Like a monk brotherhood, a
Yeah,
knighthood? Um, and then what do you love? Again, this is really around the motivations of your character too. You know, do you love, like, adventure? Is that the only thing you love, or is there more to it? Um, are you an introvert or extrovert? Your
yeah,
character, your character could be. They don't have to all be like alpha North American extrovert, like our society pushes everybody. You don't need to. You could have a quieter character. Um, and then how are you connected to the party? Is there something that happened before the party met where there's a connection? Maybe I don't think anybody has really done this yet, but you could have characters who are brothers and sisters, like family members. You could have family. You could have characters who are members of the same faction. That would be pretty
yeah.
cool. I don't think we've ever done that.
I don't think so either.
Everybody does their own, because everybody's doing their own story by themselves.
Yeah,
But I think it would be neat to have that, to say, okay, do two of you want to choose? You're from the same family, or you're from the same faction. Um, we mentioned enemies before. One I really like is catchphrases. So I think they can be really fun. I think that sometimes the idea that we need to be narrating every single thing in the game is overblown, because that's just not practical in the way the game works.
yeah.
There are certain dungeon masters, certain popular ones, who like to do that, but I think first of all, you're going to get burnout really fast. And second of all, it's not realistic. Um, you don't need to do that. Um, and I think that's one reason a catchphrase is fun, because hopefully it's short.
Well, exactly. I mean, think of the times where we had like theme songs, and that takes time to prepare. You have to kind of figure it out. Sometimes you might not have
Yeah.
it ready. Those kinds of things are cool, but catchphrases are easy.
Yeah, the song is fun. We have that's something we've done at our table. Hopefully we'll be playing in person again soon. Um, but we did do that once in a while. I do like catchphrases. I think they're pretty fun. I do them sometimes for the NPCs, but more when I'm playing a character. Another good one to know about is your character's greatest fear. It's always fun to have characters that have some flaws and there's some depth to them. That they're not this like superhero. Um, do you have any secrets? So that would be a good one too. Like when there are certain things that players have told me that they've said don't tell the party.
Yeah.
So that's fun when the dungeon master knows that the character has a secret and the other players don't know. That's a good one.
I had
Um,
that weird character that collected the ears of halflings or something.
yeah,
And that was one of those situations like, don't tell anyone. I want to see if they catch me doing it.
yeah,
And they eventually did. And they were
yeah,
like, "What are you doing?"
yeah. And eventually, it's one of those things where if there's a good natural consequence, usually it's closed down,
Yeah, exactly. And that's totally what happened,
which I think
which is
that's what
kind
you
of what I
wanted to
hoped
happen.
for too.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And then another good one is, do you have any regrets? I think that's interesting character wise. Um, yeah, personally, as a person, I'm not really into that, but I understand. I understand it, and um, it would be fun to play a character like that. Especially like someone maybe who was a soldier, like in Firefly. He was in the war. He was a captain, I believe, right? And
Yeah.
he has a lot of regrets from that war and how things went, I think.
Oh,
So
exactly.
yeah, I think that's fun. Have you ever been in love? So that's another good one. Again, like I told you, the character who got mixed up with this femme fatale was very interesting. It really added a lot to that story. That was several episodes where the party had to try to try to kind of extract him from this horrible relationship. Um, are you educated? So that's a good one. Has your character been taught or trained before? Often with fifth edition now, these backgrounds are partly occupations that your character might have had before the adventure.
Yeah.
So, there might have been some training or some other kind of education. A really good one that would add more to the story is, do you have a mentor, a master, or even an apprentice? Maybe you're already some sort of master. Maybe you've done your 10,000 hours already.
You're 10,000 hours and you're just seeking retirement.
Right. And
That's a
then you're
character that I
dragged,
should play.
yeah, you're dragged into the adventure, like just one more adventure, and then like 10 levels later. Yeah. That would be good. That would be good. Like you're just about to retire from like the knighthood, and then they're like, no, we've got one more adventure. And you're like well, in medieval terms, maybe you're like you're like a 40-year-old knight, which would be old, right?
I'm getting too old for this stuff.
Yeah. That would be really good.
I think I have my next character. I should
I
roll
think
that
that would be
tonight.
great. Like your constitution's low, maybe your wisdom's really high. I have this dad. I don't know if I would show this, but I have this dad shirt my family got me. That's a dad statted out for D&D.
Oh,
So it's
that's
like,
cool.
yeah, so it's like, the strength is high, the constitution's high. The intelligence I think is slightly lower. It's good. So another one would be, oh yeah, who do you like in the party? Who do you really get along with and maybe admire,
Yeah.
and who do you trust? And then the reverse, obviously, who are you not really a big fan of? And I think that's actually very interesting. I think, in our campaigns we don't have evil PCs because I think it sort of breaks the game.
Yeah.
However, that doesn't mean I don't like having tension between characters, I think that's great. I think that's real and interesting. And so I love when that happens. Even I think, having arguments and then sorting things out, I think that makes the game, actually, I think it's more interesting.
Well, yeah, because I mean, not everyone is going to get along, and you need to have that kind of interpersonal relationship stuff going on inside of a party. I mean, it gets so boring when you have all the characters who are just driving forward. They're like, "Oh, we've got to get to the blah 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 whatever
Mhm,
encounter
mhm.
or find this thing," which is okay, but if you don't have bumps in the road or you don't have, it's just like you're playing on pillows. You're kind of just coasting along, and nothing will hurt you, and that gets boring really fast. The
Yeah.
extreme end of it, like if everyone was evil, that would just be the same
Oh,
problem, just
it's
in
a
reverse.
disaster. It's a disaster. Unless you have, I mean, excuse me, a very mature dungeon master, experienced, and your party understands. Even then, like even I think when you have a really mature group who understands how to, play a story like that, I think still it's
Yeah.
the game is not built for that. It's built for a party of basically usually four, sometimes more, but around four heroes, and they're working together to accomplish something. So it just doesn't make sense that evil characters would be involved, because at any point they could try to kill each other, rob each other. It just, yeah. All right. What setting do you like? So, you know, for your character, and it could be the player as well. Do you like, the forests or the mountains more? Do you like being in the dungeon than the city more? Your character, maybe we do have some characters that we've had in our groups who prefer to be in the wilderness. And actually, there's one who preferred to be in the city. So again, I like that tension of where, maybe for several sessions or several weeks or months in game time, this character's like, oh man, I can't wait till I get back home. Or, you know what I mean? Like it doesn't have to, like you said, it doesn't have to be perfect all the time.
Yeah.
They can be, and they can be wanting something different.
I never travel in the winter. What kind of idiot travels in the winter? Oh my
Yeah.
lord, why are we doing this?
Yeah, I like that. And then maybe there's a favorite season your character has, or favorite weather. Maybe, maybe a player hates it when it rains, or another character, it's too hot for them. So
Yeah.
I think all of that adds to the flavor. Another one is your virtues. What is most important to you, and yeah, I think that's really interesting. And I think also the sins. You don't have to be evil to have to to deal with the sins and to have to wrestle with them, right? So that character that I mentioned who got involved with the femme fatale, this woman who was a lot of trouble, and again, it was a female player actually playing a male character. I mean, he was having to deal with lust and with lots of, and greed and all these different sins, and it was interesting, and it gave some more depth to the story.
It just made me think about like because we mentioned the whole idea of regrets and things like that for what characters might be experiencing through their upbringing. And I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to have like a raging alcoholic for a character? Because then suddenly, if they are buying more booze, carrying a ton of booze with them, they're drinking all the time. Like, how does that play out when you have like, oh my God, guys, we've got to deal with these insert a bunch of like yesterday or the day before, we had a bunch of scum or whatever they were called, and like
Yeah,
imagine running into those or running into the big creature that we ran into.
yeah,
And you have a character whose constitution is impacted, probably dexterity's lower. Like you have
yeah,
all these things because they've been boozing all day, and it's like suddenly it's like, oh hey, we've suddenly got in the thick of it, and your character is borderline useless to a certain degree.
yeah. Oh yeah, I think that would be an interesting. It's a real thing that real characters have to deal with, and real people. And I would actually, if I was the DM, not only would I put you and maybe some disadvantaged situations because of that, I would also sometimes maybe give you advantage, because sometimes you're, if you're intoxicated or maybe you're hungover, you're actually more free with what you're doing and you're actually better. So I would
Okay,
add
that
that.
is cool.
I would add that randomly, and I would say, actually, this attack, maybe I wouldn't even tell the other players. I would just do it in chat, or if we were at the table, I'd pass you a note and say, whatever attack you do next, do it at advantage. So, because they do have, I think it is in Xanathar's, it's the way of the drunken master.
Oh
So
yeah.
there's the subclass for the monk, which is basically using the more relaxed posture one might have if they were intoxicated or more relaxed. Um, and then of course all the, your as you said, your intelligence level definitely has gone down. You know, depending on how intoxicated you are, it's more of a vegetable kind of state. So yeah, maybe your ability to do certain cognitive functions is not very good.
Well, like back in this will date my age, but back in the day, an episode of the A Team back in the early '80s,
Yeah.
uh, there was one episode that I always thought was the funniest thing ever, um, and it was the Mr. T character had fallen asleep, or they had no, sorry, he had not fallen asleep. He had been drugged like they normally would do to get him from point A to point B because he
Right.
hated flying, etc. But
Right.
anyway, they had done that, and then they got into they crashed a plane or something, or crashed a car or truck or whatever, and then the next scene is cut to them all like coming out of the hospital with crutches and neck braces and arm casts and stuff. But the guy, Mr. T, had fallen asleep, so he was very
Right.
languid and not quite,
Right.
and he broke nothing because he was just like a rag doll.
Yeah.
So yeah, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
Can we
Yeah.
have Mr. T in our games?
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. That's going to have to be your next character now. All right. So some example backstories just of some NPCs I've had. So there was the famous Kira Killen, and this NPC started out as a noble young woman who actually preferred to be in the wilderness and was a ranger and didn't really like, being at court or even being in the village that they were. She just wanted to be out in the wilds exploring, and joined the party. And then the other element of her backstory that came in was that I just had terrible rolls with her whenever she was in combat. So after a while, I just decided to make them at disadvantage a few times. And even when I didn't, they were still terrible. And that just became part of her backstory. And she was a really nice person, really helpful to the party, and had good contacts for them as well. And ended up actually becoming quite powerful in terms of her influence. But as an adventurer, she was terrible. Another one, which is similar to what we were just talking about, is Baldin the dwarf, who your party met and you thought, oh, here's this drunken dwarf guy in the town, and he's sort of a cliche. But then it turned out that actually he's a very famous hero who's disillusioned now and who's lost his way. Um, and then you sort of had to see him rehabilitate himself over time. And then another one is the character actually who's on the cover of this book. I didn't actually do this on purpose, but on the cover of the Underworld book, there is a character called Desmond Hawkeye, who is a famous monster hunter. And his backstory is that he's sort of like Batman in a way, that he's this wealthy noble who has all this access to research and knowledge and sages, and he's learned all this, so he's learned about the Underdark, the underworld. He's learned about monsters, and so he's an adventurer. He's a monster hunter, but he's also this researcher and noble. And then he has a mansion that has access to the underworld, and he flies this dragon-like bat creature, which is in the book as well, down like from tunnels from his manor down into the Underdark to go on these adventures. Just my idea was, like Batman, going out of the Batcave with his Batmobile. That was the idea. Yeah.
It is so cool to be able to take pop culture stuff and rebuild it in D&D, uh, because it's somewhat familiar,
Yeah.
but it also, when you're playing, you kind of go hee hee hee. That's kind of cool.
For sure, because it's different. I mean, there are some differences there, and one is that he's 52, so he's kind of almost like merging Alfred and Batman, Bruce Wayne, almost merging those sort of characters, and then he's sort of Jedi-like as well. So kind of yeah, there's a definite Obi-Wan Kenobi in there too, and
Nice.
I seem to have Obi-Wan Kenobi in a lot of my characters.
Well, he's a great archetype to follow because he has these,
Yeah,
powers that you can't really explain, but then you can turn that reality into, hey, because we, in Star Wars it's called the Force, but in this particular situation, it could be some sort of intuitive thing, or it could be an actual magic spell, or it could be, it just depends on kind of which direction you go in. But it gives us so many cool options because then you can learn later on, well, I don't want to build Batman, but I remember the cool thing about Batman or about Obi-Wan Kenobi or about, I don't know, The Rock,
yeah.
Dwayne The Rock Johnson. Uh, they had these elements that are really interesting, and you could actually pull that out and extrapolate that onto new characters that are not quite the same, but are very different, but still have, some interesting features to them that freak players out.
Yeah, well, it's true, and the monk has really changed, and part of it is these archetypes, they're in a different form in different time periods. So the monk long ago is different now. The monk now is more active, and that is really what the Jedi is a warrior monk.
Yeah,
So it really it makes sense in our time, which is what George Lucas was doing anyway. He was taking old myths and old archetypes and putting them in new characters and new forms. That was his whole, that was his whole motivation. He studied this writer called Joseph Campbell. He was his apprentice basically, and then he decided, I'm going to make a myth using archetypes that's going to appeal to children in our world, and that's
yeah.
that's what Star Wars is. So, and Indiana Jones too. So the last one I just wanted to mention quickly is Oswald Meir, another character with a backstory. So this is the wizard on the front of another book, on our wilderness monster book, and he's a big part of our world of Mir. The world is named after him. And so he's a wizard who, I won't go into the whole backstory, but basically he he's like a mad scientist who has pushed the boundaries too far,
Right.
and then now he's trying to make up for what he's done, but he's already opened up Pandora's box. So it's a
Right.
bit late, but he's trying to do what he can to deal with what he's created, which really is the theme of that whole wilderness book that we wrote. And then you also find out, and I intentionally put this at the back of the book, is that his family was a disaster. So there is a reason why he did what he did, and so I think that's very interesting. And if I'm a dungeon master, which I am 90% of the time, I would always encourage people to have a great detailed backstory. And at the same time, it's totally not necessary. You don't have to do it. But if you do give that detail, that adds so much flavor for the dungeon master to put into the game. And then, maybe that can help you be more engaged in the game as well.
Exactly. Exactly. His family was a disaster. So, that just makes me laugh.
Oh yeah.
uh, um, yeah, so overall, digging into the backstories helps DMs. Creating them for DMs is actually really, I think, I mean, for the longest time, was pretty lazy at it. Now I've been trying to actually make an effort for the past, I don't know, 6 months or so. I'm like, oh, yeah, yeah. I mean, we've talked about this in episode 21, and
Right.
I'm guilty of not giving a great backstory. So, because you also have these things in the back of your mind um, that I think fall into a character constantly. Uh, However, having a more specific backstory for players, I think, allows them to expand their play style, to actually force themselves. Like having a character. I mean, one of our players is so good at it. Uh, there's several characters that have had a hate on for the undead, or a hate on for a particular faction, or whatever it might be, and their impulse is not great. They, oh, I see that thing, I have to go do it. So you could be in the middle of, say, I don't know, resupplying or something, or going to the pub, and then suddenly all hell breaks loose because that character's like, I'm sorry, that guy over there, I gotta take vengeance for whatever reason, and it just makes for a cool game. It
Oh
makes
yeah,
for
it's fun for sure. And the other thing is that, you don't have to do it right away. I mean, you can't you the character always develops. The
Mhm.
game is always developing, the world that the dungeon master is always developing, the NPCs are developing. So you can do that with your character too. Like maybe you have a really brief backstory when you start, but then as you
Right,
go
right.
along, you can add things and build it as well. So and it can build from the events that happen in the story. So that's another part of it.
Exactly. And what is, I think, and as we've talked about before, like the best place to sort of learn how to do this is to delve into. You and I have actually referenced Xanathar's so many times now,
Hmm.
because it was the resource that was missing for the player's handbook, and for elements of the DM's guide. Like there is definitely so much in there. So if you don't have Xanathar's book, I do recommend it. Um, there's also a little bit in the Sword Coast book as well, which I find really useful. And there are definitely some, as we pointed out earlier, there are generators online to help you build these kinds of things as well. But I do encourage people to try and just kind of sit down and give it some thought, and you write it out in 5 sentences about what this character is about, and you can pull stuff from that to build your character sheet.
Yeah, that's a good point. The Xanathars has an extensive backstory section as well as the list of names I was talking about. That's a
Yeah.
really good point. Yeah, there are lots of ways, lots of places you can find resources to help build it, and you can also just do it as you sit at the table as the game goes along.
Yeah, which I have done several times now, where if I'm not too convinced that this is a character that I really know how to explain what they're about, yeah, it's as the game goes on, you can actually find new things to put into your backstory or remove, because there's going to be some elements that it's like, it would be cool if I actually had this. So you can ask the DM and say, hey, by the way, I think, if we're headed this direction and we might run into, I don't know, say if you're playing on Greyhawk. Greyhawk has a huge list of towns and cities and places you can go. If you recognize or think that your character party is going to wind up in a particular locale, maybe that character you're playing has been there. Maybe they grew up there. Maybe maybe they were on tour. They're in a band, and they know the best pub, or they know which castle to avoid. Guys, we're level 2. We shouldn't really go to castle. What's it called? Because there's a vampire that lives there and he'll kick our butts. These kinds of things can happen. So having that sort of a backstory allows you to really, I mean, help the DM is probably the easiest way to put it, but feed the DM to actually give them knowledge about what these characters are doing and why they're doing it, so that they can use it. Like bringing in your parents, or simply saying, "Hey, by the way, you kind of recognize where you are right now. You came in it from a different direction, and it took you a few minutes
Mhm.
to go. Oh, wait a minute, I've been here before. Yeah, that's the thing. And oh crap, don't go over there. These kinds of things can be really cool, especially when it looks different too. Oh, I don't remember that thing being
Mhm.
there. So, yeah, backstories are critically important. I'm gonna say it. They're critical. You must do them. If you do not, then you are a boring player. Uh, any final words? Anything that you'd like to share about the Kickstarter, the next Kickstarter? He says, sort of poking a little bit.
Yeah, well, the next Kickstarter is going to be really different than the one we just did, the Phelan 2. So that was a lot of that was about fairy tales and, there's wild corgis and there's giant butterfly creatures. And this is going to be very different. This is going back to the roots of the game.
Nice.
And we're going to have more, we're going to have a lot of, we'll still have some high level monsters, mid level monsters, but we're going to have a lot more low level ones so that partly because we've done so many high level creatures, but we're going to give you we're going to give you a lot of creatures you could use all the time. And we've already announced it's going to be monsters of the dungeon, so it's going to be really going back to the old beginnings of the game where a group of heroes goes out to a dungeon and has a dungeon crawl. Although all of these creatures that we make in all the books you can use in other environments.
Yeah.
And we're always trying to do something new. So I think this one more than ever, we've got a lot of different mechanics and strange creatures. One thing you can do in the dungeon for sure is have lots of aberrations, lots of very alien creatures, like
Yeah.
a mind flayer or a beholder. So this will have a lot for DMs and players that you've never seen before.
I'm excited. I'm excited. Wait a minute. When does it start? I'm going to pay right now. I want everything.
We'll probably be able to give the link hopefully at the beginning of April, and then we'll probably launch mid-April. We'll probably
Nice.
give the link early that people can sign up for the notification of the launch.
Cool.
And yeah, the art also we're gonna have a lot more action. So we haven't had that many action pieces. So we've decided this is gonna have much more, and we'll give some
Nice.
examples of that when we launch.
Very cool. I'm
Yeah.
excited. And of course, if you haven't picked up any of Cawood Publishing's books, you could go to theworldofmere.com because if you want to know anything of what's going on with this particular little show of ours, all of the information will be in the description down below. But we just thought we'd play a little bit and throw in a little bit of stuff that, you just know where to go. We're on Twitter, and come visit. Say hi. All
And
right.
later we'll have the World of Mere weather down there, weather reports and stuff.
Exactly. Apparently on no, anyway, I could go on forever. But thank you everybody for watching. Thank you for listening. And of course, as I said, everything's down there. And we'll see you next time. Bye, everybody.
Later.